I never imagined my life's work would end with a single phone call. That morning I was doing what I'd done for 42 years, arranging books in the window display of Moonlight Margins, our family's historic bookstore. The morning light filtered through the salt-sprayed windows, casting shadows across the weathered hardwood floors where my son Callum once played between the aisles. When his number flashed across my phone screen, I smiled, thinking he was calling about our weekly dinner plans. Instead, his words cut through me like winter wind off the harbor. "Stay out of my life, Mother. I mean it this time." Before I share what happened next, let me ask you, what would you do if protecting someone you love meant losing them forever? And tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun painted long shadows across the worn spines of leather-bound classics as I traced my fingers along the shelves of Moonlight Margins. 42 years of memories lived in these walls, each book a testament to our family's legacy in Millbrook Cove. The antique brass bell above the door still chimed the same melody it did when Edmund and I first opened the shop in 1981, back when we were young dreamers with more passion than business sense. I'm Marigold Whittaker, Goldie to anyone who's known me longer than 5 minutes. At 72, I've spent more years among these books than anywhere else. The shop sits 3 blocks from the lighthouse, close enough to catch the salt breeze and far enough to avoid the worst of tourist season chaos. It's a 3-story Victorian beauty with bay windows and gingerbread trim that Edmund fell in love with at first sight. "This isn't just a building, Goldie girl," he'd said, his eyes twinkling with that dreamer's light I adored. "This is our future." The morning Callum called, I'd been arranging our new window display, a tribute to local authors featuring Imogen Fairfax's latest historical memoir about Millbrook Cove's fishing industry. Imogen, now 82 and sharp as ever, had been one of our first customers. She'd wandered in during a nor'easter, dripping wet and looking for shelter, then stayed 3 hours discussing Victorian literature with Edmund, while I made endless cups of Earl Grey. "The shop looks exactly the same," she'd said last week, perched in her usual armchair by the maritime history section. Like time forgot to touch it. But time hadn't forgotten. It had left its mark in the creaking floorboards, the slight tilt to the mystery section's shelves, and the fading photograph behind the register of Edmund holding baby Callum among towering stacks of books. Edmund died when Callum was 8, a sudden heart attack that left us reeling. One moment he was shelving books and telling our son stories about pirates and hidden treasures. The next, well, life has a way of changing course without warning. I took over the business operations, learned about ordering systems and accounting, and somehow managed to keep both the shop and our little family afloat. Rosemary Blackburn, Rose to her friends, became my lifeline during those dark days. The town's first female judge and my closest friend since college. She'd stop by every morning before court, bringing coffee and legal advice in equal measure. "You're stronger than you think, Goldie," she'd say, helping me make sense of insurance, papers and mortgage documents. "And that boy of yours needs to see his mother stand tall." So I stood tall. I expanded the children's section, added a coffee corner that became the town's unofficial meeting spot, and started hosting author events that drew crowds from all along the coast. Callum grew up surrounded by stories and people who loved him, even if the most important man in his life was present only in photographs and memories. The trouble began, I suppose, when he started at the investment firm in Boston. My bright, book-loving boy transformed into someone I barely recognized, all sharp suits and sharper edges. The gambling started small, poker nights with colleagues, weekend trips to Atlantic City. I noticed the changes in his eyes first, that same fevered gleam I'd seen in countless characters, in the novels lining our shelves. The classic tale of addiction, playing out in my own son's life. Thaddeus Montgomery, our town librarian, and my longtime friend, tried to warn me. Sometimes loving someone means watching them fall, Goldie. He'd said during one of our Sunday afternoon chess matches. You can't catch them every time. But mothers never stop trying to catch their children, do they? When Beatrice Sterling walked into Callum's life 6 months ago, I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. She was everything I wasn't. Young, glamorous, with a laugh that could charm birds from trees. She'd worked as a casino dealer in Vegas, she told us during that first awkward dinner, but was looking to settle down somewhere quaint. I noticed how she eyed the vintage first editions in our glass cases, the way she calculated value, even while smiling. Wren, Callum's 16-year-old daughter from his first marriage, saw through Beatrice immediately. She's fake, Gran, she'd whispered during one of her weekend visits, curled up in the window seat where her father used to read. And she's making Dad worse. Wren, with her artist's soul and her grandmother's intuition, spent more time at the shop than at her father's new downtown condo, sketching customers and helping me catalog new arrivals. The shop had always been more than just a business. It was a sanctuary, a gathering place, a living museum of stories both on and off the pages. Regular customers became family. Professor Jenkins, who ordered obscure poetry collections and left chocolate truffles on the counter. Mrs. Chen from the dim sum restaurant next door, who traded dumplings for romance novels. The group of retired teachers who met every Wednesday for their literary ladies' book club. But lately the sanctuary felt threatened. Callum's gambling debts mounted, though he tried to hide them. I discovered credit card statements in the shop's mail. He'd been using the business account. When I confronted him, he brushed it off as a temporary cash flow issue. Beatrice stood behind him, one manicured hand on his shoulder, smiling that calculating smile. I did what any mother would. I tried to help. I offered to pay off his debts if he'd seek counseling. Suggested he move back to Millbrook Cove, where I could keep an eye on him. You're suffocating me, he'd snapped during our last dinner together. I'm not that little boy reading pirate stories anymore, Mother. The morning of the phone call, I'd been thinking about Edmund. He would have known how to reach our son, how to bridge this growing chasm. The brass bell chimed as Imogen entered, carrying her author copies and a concerned expression. You look troubled, dear, she said, settling into her armchair. Is it Callum again? Before I could answer, my phone rang. His words still echo in my head. Stay out of my life, Mother. I mean it this time. I later learned what triggered his call. I'd contacted his firm's HR department about my concerns, worried about his access to client accounts. It was maternal instinct, protection wrapped in interference. He saw it as betrayal. That evening, as I closed the shop, Rose appeared with a bottle of wine and her no-nonsense expression. Tell me everything, she said, pulling 2 glasses from the cabinet behind the register, where we kept them for book launch celebrations. I poured out the whole story. The gambling, Beatrice's influence, the business account, my call to HR. Rose listened, her judge's mind probably cataloging legal implications, while her friend's heart shared my pain. You know, she said finally, swirling her wine. Sometimes the bravest thing a parent can do is step back. But stepping back doesn't mean giving up. What do you mean? It means protecting what matters while letting him face his own consequences. The shop, Goldie. It's not just your livelihood. It's your legacy, and more importantly, It's a resource for this community. Maybe it's time to think about its future." Her words planted a seed, one that would grow into a decision that would change everything. But that night, I simply sat among my beloved books, remembering a little boy who once believed in pirate treasures and happy endings. Thad stopped by the next morning, as he often did before heading to the library. He found me in the rare book room, organizing first editions, my comfort activity when my mind was troubled. "You know," he said, helping me dust a leather-bound Dickens, "I've been thinking about starting a literacy program for at-risk youth, the kind of kids who need stories most, but have the least access to them." He glanced at me sideways, in that gentle way of his. "The library budget won't cover it, of course, but wouldn't it be something?" The idea settled in my chest. Next to the ache of Callum's words, I thought about all the children who'd grown up in this shop, who'd found themselves in stories, who'd learned to dream between these walls. I thought about my own son, lost not in books anymore, but in the false promises of easy money and quick fixes. That afternoon I called Rose again, but not as a friend. I called her as my lawyer. "I need to know," I said, "about creating a foundation, and I need to know how to protect the shop from being sold or leveraged against gambling debts." "Are you sure about this, Goldie?" Her voice was careful, professional. "I've spent my life trying to give Callum everything," I replied, watching the sunset paint the bookshelves gold. "Maybe it's time to give something to all the other children who need it." The next few days passed in a blur of legal consultations and quiet planning. I called Wren and asked her to meet me at the shop after closing. She came, armed with her sketchbook and worried eyes. "Your father's inheritance," I told her, was always meant to be this shop. But sometimes the best way to honor a legacy is to transform it into something bigger than ourselves. She looked around at the familiar shelves, the worn carpet, the sunbeams dancing with dust motes. "You're going to do something important, aren't you, Gran?" I hugged her tight, this wise child who understood more than her father ever had. "Yes, love. I think I am." The brass bell chimed its familiar song, and Thad appeared with an armful of library program proposals. Rose arrived moments later with legal documents. Even Imogen came, bearing her historian's knowledge of local charitable foundations. Together we began planning the future of Moonlight Margins, not as just a bookstore, but as a foundation that would provide literacy programs, safe spaces, and yes, pirate stories for children who needed to believe in possibilities. I knew there would be consequences. Callum would see it as the ultimate betrayal, this redirecting of his inheritance. Beatrice would be furious at the loss of potential assets. But as I sat in Edmund's old leather chair, surrounded by books and friends and possibilities, I felt something I hadn't experienced since that phone call. Peace. Sometimes love means letting go. Sometimes it means building something new from the ashes of what's lost. And sometimes, just sometimes, it means turning pain into purpose. The next morning I opened the shop early. The brass bell chimed as the first customers arrived, and I smiled, ready to begin again. The morning everything changed started like any other. I was arranging a new shipment of leather-bound classics when the certified letter arrived. The return address bore the name of Callum's law firm, Sterling and Associates. Yes, the same Sterling as Beatrice's family. My hands trembled slightly as I opened the envelope, the morning light streaming through the shop's bay windows, suddenly feeling colder. "Dear Mrs. Whitaker," it began formally, as if I hadn't changed this lawyer's diapers 30 years ago. This letter serves as formal notice regarding the contested ownership of Moonlight Margins bookstore, pursuant to the inheritance claims of Callum Whitaker. The words blurred before my eyes. Callum wasn't just trying to stop me from creating the foundation. He was attempting to claim immediate ownership of the shop through some obscure clause in Edmund's will. A clause that, according to these papers, could be activated if I was deemed mentally unfit to manage the business. I sank into Edmund's old leather chair behind the counter, the one that still held the impression of his form after all these years. The brass bell above the door chimed, and I quickly tucked the letter into my cardigan pocket. "Goldie?" Thad's familiar voice carried concern. "You look like you've seen a ghost. Just family matters," I managed, trying to smile. But Thad had known me too long to be fooled. He set his usual morning coffee on the counter, 2 sugars, splash of cream, and settled into the chair opposite mine. "Tell me," he said simply. Before I could respond, the bell chimed again. Beatrice Sterling sashayed in, her designer heels clicking against the hardwood floors like tiny hammers. She wore a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mrs. Whitaker," she purred. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." Thad stood, his normally gentle expression hardening slightly. "I'll be in the history section if you need me, Goldie," he said, giving my shoulder a reassuring squeeze as he passed. Beatrice waited until he was out of earshot before speaking. "I assume you received our letter?" Our letter. Not Callum's letter. The distinction wasn't lost on me. "I did," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "Though I'm surprised my son didn't deliver this news himself. Callum is indisposed at the moment. The stress of your recent actions has taken quite a toll on him." She ran a manicured finger along the spines of nearby books. "Of course, this whole situation could be resolved amicably if you'd simply reconsider your plans for the foundation." The threat was clear beneath her polished veneer. I thought of all the signs I'd ignored, the way Callum's gambling had escalated after meeting her, the mysterious business trips, the way she'd encouraged his distance from family. "Where is my son, Beatrice?" She examined her perfect nails. "Getting the help he needs, the kind of help that documents his state of mind quite thoroughly. It would be a shame if his medical records revealed that his instability was hereditary." The implications hit me like a physical blow. They weren't just after the shop. They were trying to build a case that I was unfit to manage it. Every concerned phone call I'd made about Callum's gambling, every attempt to protect him, would be twisted into evidence of my interference and declining mental state. The brass bell chimed again, and Rose swept in like an avenging angel in judicial robes. One look at my face, and she knew something was wrong. "Judge Blackburn," Beatrice acknowledged, her smile tightening. "How fortunate you happened to stop by." "Indeed," Rose replied coolly. "Goldie, I need to discuss that legal matter we spoke about privately." Beatrice took the hint, but not before delivering one final barb. "Do consider our offer, Mrs. Whitaker. Family matters should stay within the family, don't you think?" After she left, I showed Rose the letter. Her face darkened as she read. "This is quite a piece of work," she muttered. "They're trying to use Edmund's old guardianship clause, the one he included when you were both young, in case something happened to you while Callum was still a minor. It was never meant for this. They're saying I'm unfit, Rose. They're going to use every attempt I made to help him against me. Like hell they are." Rose pulled out her phone. "I'm calling in some favors. We need to document everything, every transaction, every conversation, every sign of Callum's gambling. And we need to move fast on the foundation paperwork. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Thad brought lunch from the cafe next door, then helped me gather financial records while Rose made calls. Imogen arrived with her historian's precision, ready to document the shop's community impact over the years. Around 3, Wren slipped in through the back door, her school backpack clutched tight. "Dad's home," she said without preamble. "He's different, scary different. Beatrice has him convinced you're trying to steal his inheritance." My heart clenched. "Are you safe, sweetheart?" She nodded. "Mom knows what's happening. She's filing for full custody modification." She pulled out her sketchbook. "I've been documenting things. The gambling, the fights, the way Beatrice manipulates him. I know I'm just a kid, but maybe it could help." I hugged her close. This brave granddaughter who saw so clearly what her father couldn't. The brass bell chimed again. This time it was Mrs. Chen from next door, carrying a bag of dumplings and a worried expression. "Bad energy today?" she declared, setting the food down. "I see that woman leave earlier, like Snake in Pretty Shoes." She pulled something from her pocket, a worn business card. "My nephew, good lawyer, handles family cases. No charge for consultation." The support of my community wrapped around me like a warm blanket. While Rose reviewed Wren's documentation, Thad and Imogen organized character references from longtime customers. Mrs. Chen made calls to other local business owners, gathering evidence of the shop's importance to the community. But the real blow came at closing time. As I was turning the sign on the door, a police officer appeared. "Mrs. Whitaker, I have a temporary restraining order." He looked uncomfortable. "You're to remain 500 feet from Mr. Callum Whitaker and Ms. Beatrice Sterling." Rose, who had stayed here, late to work on the foundation papers, was beside me instantly. "On what grounds?" "Alleged harassment and stalking behavior." He handed over the papers. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I remember coming to your story hours when I was a kid. After he left, I read the allegations with growing horror. Every worried phone call, every attempt to check on Callum, every conversation with his colleagues, all twisted into a pattern of obsessive behavior and delusional concerns." "They're trying to isolate you," Rose said grimly. "Make you look unstable. Classic manipulation tactic." That night, after everyone had gone, I sat in the darkened shop surrounded by thousands of books. Each one contained stories of conflict, of challenge, of characters facing moments of truth. Now I was living my own chapter, and the stakes couldn't be higher. I pulled out my phone and recorded a video, my voice steady despite the tears threatening to fall. "My name is Marigold Whitaker. I am of sound mind and body. Today is date, and I want to document why I'm creating the Moonlight Margins Literacy Foundation. This isn't about disinheriting my son. It's about protecting his legacy while he's unable to protect himself. And it's about creating something larger than ourselves." The next morning, I arrived early to find Callum waiting outside the shop. He looked haggard, his once warm eyes now hard and unfamiliar. "You're violating the restraining order," he said without greeting. "This is my place of business, Callum. You knew I'd be here." "Not for long." He stepped closer, his voice low. "Did you really think I wouldn't find out about the foundation? That I'd let you give away my inheritance to strangers?" "They're not strangers," I replied softly. "They're children who need what this place offers, just like you once did." I needed a mother who trusted me to live my own life. Instead, I got one who couldn't stop interfering. His laugh was bitter. "Well, now you'll have plenty of time to help other people's children, because you've lost your own." He turned to leave, then paused. "The court date is in 3 weeks. I'd start packing up these precious books of yours." I watched him walk away, this stranger wearing my son's face. The brass bell chimed as I unlocked the door, its familiar sound now carrying a note of uncertainty. Inside, I found a small package. On the counter, inside was a framed photograph I'd never seen before. Edmund reading to toddler Callum in the shop's window seat, both of them laughing at some long-forgotten joke. A note from Imogen was attached. "Found this while researching the shop's history. Thought you might need a reminder of what you're fighting for." The morning light caught the dust motes dancing between the shelves, and I remembered something Edmund used to say. "Books are like people, Goldie girl. Sometimes the most valuable ones come with a bit of wear and tear." I straightened my shoulders and began preparing for the day. The shop had survived 42 years of changes. It would survive this too, even if it meant becoming something new. The brass bell chimed as the first customer entered. Life, like every good story, had to move forward, one page at a time. Throughout the day, more allies appeared. Professor Jenkins brought contact information for literacy experts, willing to testify about the Foundation's potential impact. The Literary Ladies Book Club organized a letter-writing campaign to the local paper. Even the town council scheduled an emergency meeting to discuss designating the shop as a historical landmark. But it was Thad who provided the most unexpected support. As we closed up that evening, he hesitated by the door. "You know," he said carefully, "I've been sitting on an inheritance of my own, my aunt's estate. Well, it's substantial. If you need help fighting this—" I touched his arm gently. "Thad, I couldn't possibly—" "You're not just fighting for the shop, Goldie. You're fighting for every child who needs a safe place to discover stories, including Callum, whether he knows it or not." That night, I stayed late cataloging rare books, my mind churning with possibilities and fears. The shop felt different in the darkness. More alive somehow, as if all the stories it contained were standing guard. A soft knock at the back door startled me. It was Wren, clutching her sketchbook and looking scared. "I heard them talking," she said as I ushered her inside. "Beatrice and Dad. She's been recording him, getting him to say things when he's upset or drinking. She's going to use it in court." I held my granddaughter close, feeling her shoulders shake with suppressed sobs. "It's going to be all right, sweetheart. Sometimes the hardest chapters lead to the most important endings." But as I looked around at the shop, at Edmund's chair and the children's corner where Callum had played, at the window seat where I'd read stories to Wren, I wondered if this might be the final chapter for Moonlight and Margins as I knew it. The brass bell sat silent in the darkness, waiting for tomorrow's story to begin. The weight of impending battle settled over Moonlight and Margins like morning fog off the harbor. I began documenting everything. Every receipt, every conversation, every memory of Callum's descent into gambling. The leather-bound journal Edmund had given me on our last anniversary became my war room in miniature. That morning, Rose arrived earlier than usual, carrying a thick manila envelope and a determined expression. "We need to talk about what's coming. Goldie, Beatrice's family has connections throughout the state legal system. This won't be just about the shop anymore." I poured us both coffee in the mismatched mugs we'd collected over years of author events. "Tell me." "They're building a case around your mental state. Every time you tried to help Callum, every concerned call, every attempt to intervene with his gambling, They're painting it as obsessive behavior. She pulled out a stack of papers. They've subpoenaed your medical records, your financial transactions, even your book ordering history. My book ordering history? They're trying to suggest that your recent large orders of addiction recovery books and family counseling materials show an unhealthy fixation. She smiled grimly. Of course, we can prove those were for the Foundation's planned programs, but it shows how deep they're willing to dig. The brass bell chimed, and Mrs. Chen hurried in, clutching a newspaper. You see this? They print lies. About you! The local paper's headline read, Historic Bookstore at Center of Family Mental Health Crisis. I scanned the article, my heart sinking. Anonymous sources quoted about my increasingly erratic behavior, concerns about my obsession with controlling my adult son's life, even a suggestion that the Foundation was a manifestation of delusional philanthropic grandeur. Beatrice's handiwork, Rose muttered. She's friends with the publisher's wife. The bell chimed again. This time it was Imogen, moving faster than I'd seen her move in years. Don't worry about that rubbish, she announced, waving her own copy of the paper. I've already called in a favor with the Herald. They're running a counterpiece about the shop's historical significance and your decades of community service. Throughout the day, more allies appeared. Professor Jenkins brought documentation of every educational program we'd hosted. The literary ladies arrived with years of book club minutes, proving the shop's role as a cultural center. Even the school librarian stopped by with letters from former students who'd found sanctuary among our shelves. But it was Thad's contribution that afternoon that truly shifted the momentum. He arrived carrying a dusty box of library records. I found something interesting, he said, spreading papers across the counter. Remember that literacy program you ran in the 90s? The one for at-risk teens? He pulled out faded photographs and newspaper clippings. Look who benefited. There, in a yellowed photo, was a teenage boy who'd later become the city's police chief. Another showed a girl now serving as a state representative. Success stories. Dozens of them, all grown from seeds planted in this shop. Telling and preparing. This story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. This is what we build the Foundation's case on, Rose said, examining the documents. Not just what you want to do, but what you've already done. Patterns of community service, not obsession. As we strategized, Wren slipped in through the back door, her school day finished. She'd been spending more time at the shop since Callum's. Restraining order, claiming the window seat as her homework spot. Today, though, she carried something besides her backpack, a large art portfolio. I've been working on something, she said, carefully removing a series of sketches. It's the shop story, but in pictures. The drawings took my breath away. The first showed Edmund and me on opening day, young and hopeful. Then Callum as a child, surrounded by books and possibilities. The regular customers, each captured in perfect detail. Mrs. Chen sharing dumplings, Professor Jenkins teaching impromptu poetry lessons, the literary ladies in their usual corner. The final sketch showed the shop transformed into the Foundation, with children reading in every corner. This is how I see it, Gran, Wren said softly. Not just a store, but a story that keeps growing. Rose studied the drawings thoughtfully. These could help us. Visual evidence of the shop's community impact. Through the eyes of the next generation. The bell chimed again, this time announcing a face I didn't recognize. A sharp-suited woman, with kind eyes. Mrs. Whitaker, I'm Diana Frost, from the State Historical Society. We've been following your situation. Over the next hour, Diana explained how properties like Moonlight and Margins could qualify for special protection under historical preservation laws. The building's architectural significance, combined with its cultural impact, we might be able to prevent any immediate ownership changes pending review. It wasn't a solution, but it was breathing room. Rose immediately began preparing the necessary paperwork, while Imogen dove into researching the building's history. As closing time approached, I found myself in the rare book room, running my fingers along familiar spines. Each volume held not just its printed story, but memories. The day Edmund found that first edition Dickens, Callum learning to read from well-worn fairy tales, Wren discovering Jane Austen. A soft knock interrupted my reverie. It was Mrs. Chen, carrying her usual end-of-day dumplings and a determined expression. "You know why I bring food every day?" she asked, setting down the bag. "When I first come to America, your husband helped me with English. Sit with me after closing, teach me words. When he die, you continue. Never ask payment, just feed my mind. Now I feed your body, is balance." Her simple wisdom brought tears to my eyes. This was what Beatrice and her lawyers couldn't understand. The shop wasn't just a business or an inheritance. It was a web of connections, of lives touched and changed. That evening, after everyone had gone, I began writing letters, one to each person who'd ever found sanctuary between these walls, one to each author who'd shared their stories here, one to Callum, though I knew I couldn't send it yet, and one to Edmund, telling him about our son, our shop, and the battle ahead. The next morning brought both challenge and opportunity. A reporter from the Herald arrived for the promised counter-story, but so did another certified letter, this one demanding an immediate inventory of all rare books and first editions. "They're trying to establish the shop's total value," Rose explained, building their case for asset division. But the demand had an unexpected benefit. As we cataloged the rare book room, we discovered something extraordinary. Edmund's old business journals documenting every significant purchase and sale since opening day, including detailed notes about the shop's educational programs and community impact. "This is gold," Rose declared, paging through the journals. Concrete evidence of the shop's dual role as both business and community resource. It supports everything we're trying to do with the foundation. The brass bell announced Thad's arrival. He carried not just his usual morning coffee, but a thick folder. "I've been doing some research of my own, about Beatrice Sterling." What he'd found was illuminating. Before moving to our town, she'd been involved in similar situations in 3 other cities, befriending wealthy older men, encouraging their estrangement from family, then disappearing when their assets were depleted. "She's not just after the shop," Thad said grimly. "She's isolating Callum, making him dependent on her. The gambling debts give her leverage." "Can we prove any of this?" Rose asked. "Better." Thad smiled slightly. "I found someone willing to testify. Her former partner in Las Vegas. Apparently, Beatrice left some burned bridges behind." As we absorbed this information, Wren arrived with more drawings, this time documenting the changes she'd observed in her father since meeting Beatrice. The progression was stark, from engaged parent to distracted gambler to angry stranger. "I love Dad," she said, her voice small. "But this isn't him anymore. It's like she's stolen who he used to be." The bell chimed again, this time announcing an unexpected visitor. My old friend Helen, who'd moved to Florida years ago. She carried a small box. "I saw the article," she said by way of greeting. "Thought you might need these." Inside the box were photographs from the shop's early days, including something I'd forgotten. Documentation of our first literacy program, the one that had inspired Callum to teach reading to younger kids when he was in high school. "Before the gambling," Helen said softly. "Before all this mess, your son understood what this place meant." Maybe these will help remind him. As word spread about the legal battle, more people came forward with stories and evidence. Professor Jenkins brought journals from former students who'd written about the shop's impact on their lives. The literary ladies compiled years of charitable donations made through their book club. Even the local coffee shop owner testified about how our partnership had revitalized the downtown area. But it was Mrs. Chen who provided the most unexpected support. Her nephew, the lawyer she'd mentioned, specialized in cases involving financial exploitation of the elderly. Though I bristled at being considered elderly, his expertise proved invaluable. "This isn't just about the shop or the foundation," he explained during a late-night strategy session. "This is about protecting vulnerable individuals from predatory relationships. If we can prove Beatrice's pattern of behavior..." The pieces were falling into place, but so was the pressure. Each day brought new legal demands, new accusations, new attempts to paint me as an unstable mother unable to let go. The local paper ran another article, this time suggesting that my obsession with the past was preventing natural business evolution. I found myself spending more time in the rare book room, surrounded by the wisdom of centuries. These books had survived wars, depressions, and countless personal dramas. Surely they could survive this. One quiet afternoon, as I was cataloging first editions, I found something tucked between the pages of an old volume. A letter from Edmund I'd never seen before, dated just weeks before his death. "My dearest Goldie girl," it began. "If you're reading this, something's happened to me. I need you to know that the shop was never just about selling books. It's about creating space for stories to change lives. Whatever comes, protect that. Even if it means changing everything, to keep the heart of it alive." The letter shook me to my core. Edmund had understood even then that the shop might need to evolve. The foundation wasn't a betrayal of his legacy. It was a fulfillment of it. That evening, as I shared the letter with Rose and Thad, another piece of the puzzle arrived. One of Callum's former colleagues, risking his job to come forward with evidence of how Beatrice had orchestrated their chance meeting. She researched him, the colleague revealed. Knew about his gambling history, his relationship with the shop, everything. This wasn't random. Rose immediately began preparing additional legal motions, while Thad contacted his sources in Las Vegas. The web of manipulation was becoming clearer, but so was the danger. If Beatrice realized how much we knew, my fears were confirmed the next morning when Wren arrived in tears. "They're getting married," she burst out. "Next week. Dad says it's because they're in love. But I heard them talking. Beatrice says marriage will strengthen their legal case." The news hit like a physical blow. Marriage would indeed complicate everything, giving Beatrice legal standing she currently lacked. We had less time than we'd thought. But as I looked around, the shop, at the gathered allies, the accumulated evidence, the stories of lives changed, I realized something important. We weren't just fighting against something. We were fighting for something, for every child who might need these books, these stories, this sanctuary. The brass bell chimed its familiar song, and I straightened my shoulders. Another day was beginning at Moonlight and Margins, another chapter in our ongoing story, and I intended to make it count. The morning of Callum's wedding dawned grey and restless, much like my own thoughts. I stood in Moonlight Margins' rare book room, running my fingers along the spines of first editions Edmund and I had collected over 4 decades. The irony wasn't lost on me. While my son rushed to marry a woman who'd orchestrated his downfall, I was surrounded by stories of redemption, sacrifice, and triumph over adversity. The brass bell chimed early, announcing Rose's arrival. She carried not just her usual legal briefcase, but a thick manila envelope that made my heart skip. "The investigation results came in," she said without preamble. "Goldie, it's worse than we thought." Over the next hour, she laid out what her private investigator had uncovered. Beatrice Sterling wasn't just a con artist. She was part of a sophisticated network that targeted vulnerable individuals with addiction issues. The gambling debts Callum had accumulated weren't random losses. They were carefully orchestrated to create dependency. "There's more," Rose continued, pulling out bank statements. "Remember those business accounts Callum had access to? They've been systematically drained over the past 3 months. Small amounts, nothing obvious, but it adds up to nearly $200,000. I sank into Edmund's old chair, my legs suddenly weak. Does he know? Is he part of this? I don't think so. The transactions are all in Beatrice's name, using power of attorney documents Callum apparently signed while intoxicated. Rose's expression hardened. They're getting married today because she knows we're close to exposing everything. Marriage gives her legal protections she doesn't currently have. The bell chimed again. This time it was Thad, looking more disheveled than usual. "I just got off the phone with my contact in Vegas. Beatrice's former partner agreed to testify, but there's a complication. He's being threatened." Before we could process this news, Wren burst through the back door, still wearing her bridesmaid's dress. "Gran, you have to help. Dad's not himself. They gave him something. He can barely stand up, but they're saying it's just wedding nerves." Rose was already on her phone calling in favors with the local judiciary. Thad rushed to contact his police. Friends. But I knew what I had to do. The restraining order be damned. My son needed me. Mrs. Chen appeared as if summoned, taking one look at my face and nodding. "I drive you. My cousin's boy on security at wedding venue. He let us in back way." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. While Rose prepared emergency injunctions and Thad coordinated with law enforcement, I found myself being hustled through the service entrance of the Grand Harbor Hotel. Mrs. Chen's cousin's son, a mountain of a man named James, led us through back corridors to a small room where Callum was supposedly resting before the ceremony. What we found made my blood run cold. My son lay slumped in a chair, his eyes unfocused, while Beatrice's brother, a man I'd never trusted, stood guard. "You can't be here," he started to say, but James stepped forward, security badge prominent. "Health and safety check," he rumbled. "Standard procedure." While they argued, I knelt beside Callum. His skin was clammy, his pupils dilated. "Mom?" he mumbled. "Everything's spinning." "I'm here, sweetheart. We're going to get you help." Beatrice's brother moved to stop us, but James blocked his path. "Ma'am," he said formally, for the benefit of his body camera. "As head of security, I'm concerned about this gentleman's condition. Medical assistance has been called." What happened next would later be described in police reports and court documents, but living through it was like watching a carefully constructed house of cards collapse. Beatrice, resplendent in her designer wedding gown, burst into the room just as the paramedics arrived. Her carefully maintained facade cracked when she saw me. "You're violating the restraining order," she snarled, all pretense of refinement gone. "Security! Remove this woman!" But James stood firm. "Medical emergency takes precedence, ma'am, and my body camera's recording everything." The paramedics quickly assessed Callum, their expressions grim. "These symptoms... Has he been given something?" Before anyone could respond, Rose arrived with both the police and a judge she'd pulled away from his Sunday gardening. The next few minutes were chaos. Beatrice attempting to assert her rights as the bride, the judge reviewing emergency motions, the police taking statements. Through it all, I held Callum's hand as the paramedics worked. "Mom," he whispered at one point, sounding more lucid. "I think I've made some terrible mistakes." "Shh," I soothed, brushing his hair back like I did when he was small. "We'll sort everything out." The toxicology report would later confirm what we suspected. Callum had been drugged, a combination of anti-anxiety medications and alcohol that could have been lethal. The discovery of the drugs in Beatrice's purse, along with documentation of the financial fraud, led to her arrest right there in her wedding dress. But that was just the beginning. The next few weeks were a blur of hospitals, rehabilitation facilities, legal depositions, and long nights at the shop trying to untangle the financial damage. The local paper, which had been so quick to question my mental state, now ran daily updates on what they called the Black Widow of Bookstore's case. Through it all, Moonlight and Margins remained open, its brass bell chiming welcome to a community that rallied around us like never before. The literary ladies organized a schedule to help staff the shop while I dealt with legal matters. Professor Jenkins and his colleagues created a lecture series on financial literacy and addiction awareness. Even Mrs. Chen's extended family adopted us, ensuring we were fed and supported through the longest days. Ren spent every free moment at the shop, working on a new series of drawings, this time documenting the community's response to crisis. "See, Gran?" she'd say, showing me sketches of neighbors helping neighbors, of light overcoming darkness. "This is what the Foundation can do. This is why it matters." One quiet evening, about a month after the failed wedding, Callum asked to see me. He was still in rehab, working through both the addiction and the trauma of Beatrice's manipulation. I found him in the facility's garden, looking older and younger somehow at the same time. "I found this in my wallet," he said without preamble, holding out a worn photograph. "I've been carrying it for years without really seeing it." It was the picture of Edmund reading to him in the shop's window seat, both of them laughing at some forgotten joke. My heart caught at the memory. "Dad understood something I forgot," Callum continued softly. "The shop was never just about books, or money, or inheritance. It was about creating space for stories to change lives." He looked up at me, his eyes clear for the first time in years. "Like you're trying to do with the Foundation." I took his hand, feeling the tremors that still occasionally shook him. "Your father wrote me a letter before he died. I found it recently. He said sometimes we have to change everything to keep the heart of something alive." "I'd like to help," Callum said, "with the Foundation. Not running it. I need to focus on my recovery. But maybe I could share my story, help other families recognize the signs I missed." The brass bell above the shop door had chimed thousands of times over the years, but none of its songs had been sweeter than my son's words in that moment. The legal battles weren't over, of course. Beatrice's network had tentacles throughout the state, and untangling all the financial damage took months. But something fundamental had shifted. The shop, which had been at the center of so much conflict, became a symbol of healing. Rose helped us restructure everything legally, creating ironclad protections for both the business and the foundation. Thad's research skills proved invaluable in documenting similar cases across the country, leading to a broader investigation of predatory schemes targeting addiction-vulnerable individuals. Mrs. Chen's nephew, working pro bono, helped us create a financial literacy program specifically designed for recovery communities. Not charity, she insisted. Investment in future. Like your husband invest in my English. Now I invest in others. The literary ladies expanded their book club to include a support group for families affected by addiction. Professor Jenkins developed a curriculum combining bibliotherapy with practical life skills. Even James, the security guard who'd helped save Callum, became a regular volunteer, teaching self-defense classes in the shop's newly renovated community space. But it was Wren who truly captured the transformation. Her sketches, which had documented our darkest moments, now told stories of hope. She drew recovering addicts, finding solace in books, children discovering new worlds between pages, families healing through shared stories. "You know what I love about art, Gran," she said one day, working on a mural for the children's section. "You can take something painful and make it into something beautiful, like what we're doing with the shop." The Foundation's first official program launched 6 months after the failed wedding. Callum, now 8 months sober, was our inaugural speaker. Standing in the same spot where he'd once played as a child, he shared his journey from addiction to recovery, from manipulation to clarity. "This place saved my life twice," he told the gathered crowd. "Once when I was a kid discovering who I could be through books, and again when it gave me a reason to fight my way back to myself." I watched from Edmund's old chair, tears mixing with smile lines. The brass bell chimed steadily as more people arrived, each one carrying their own story, their own need for sanctuary. That evening, after the last visitor had left and the shop settled into its familiar creaks and whispers, I found myself in the rare book room. The first editions stood proud on their shelves, each one a testament to stories that had survived centuries of change. "We did it, Edmund," I whispered to the quiet stacks. "We kept the heart of it alive." The brass bell chimed one final time, Thad bringing his usual end-of-day coffee and quiet company. "You know," he said, settling into the chair opposite mine, "I've been thinking about what makes some stories last. It's not just the words on the page. It's the way they change and grow with each new reader, each new generation." I looked around at the shop that had been my life's work, now transformed into something larger than Edmund or I had ever imagined. The Foundation's programs were already touching lives, creating ripples that would spread far beyond our small, coastal town. "Sometimes," I replied. "The best stories are the ones we're brave enough to rewrite." The evening light filtered through the bay windows, casting long shadows across floors worn smooth by decades of footsteps. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new stories, new chances to make a difference. But for now, in the quiet of the shop that had seen so much love and loss and redemption, I was exactly where I needed to be. The brass bell hung silent above the door, waiting for tomorrow's chapter to begin. The morning everything changed. Again. Started with a letter. Not the legal kind that had become so familiar, but a personal one, handwritten on expensive stationery. The return address made my hands shake. Sterling and Associates, but not from Beatrice. "Dear Mrs. Whitaker." It began in elegant script. "My name is Victoria Sterling. I'm Beatrice's mother, and I believe I have information that will change everything. You think you know about your husband's death?" I read those words 3 times, standing in Moonlight and Margins' morning quiet, before the brass bell chimed. Rose took one look at my face and immediately locked the front door. "What is it?" I handed her the letter, watching as her judicial composure cracked. "This is impossible," she muttered. "Edmund's death was a heart attack. Natural causes. We were all there." But Victoria Sterling's letter suggested otherwise. According to her, Beatrice's manipulation of our family hadn't begun with Callum. She'd been involved with Edmund during his mysterious year in Greece, back when Callum was still in high school. The heart attack that took him wasn't random. It was induced by a combination of stress and carefully administered substances. "You have carried this guilt for 20 years, Victoria wrote. "I knew what my daughter was doing, but I stayed silent. Now that she's facing charges, I can't bear the weight anymore. The documentation is in a safety deposit box at Harbor Trust Bank. Box 1964. Your wedding year, I believe." The key is enclosed. The brass bell chimed again. Thad, carrying his usual morning coffee. He found us still standing there. The letter, between us like a live wire. "We need to verify this," Rose said finally, her legal mind engaging. "Harbor Trust opens at 9. Goldie, are you up for this?" Was I up for discovering that my husband's death might not have been natural? That the woman who'd nearly destroyed our son had first destroyed his father? That 20 years of grief might actually be 20 years of hidden murder? "I need to know," I said simply. The next few hours were a blur of activity. Rose made calls to her investigative team. Thad used his librarian's research skills to dig into newspaper archives from that period. I found myself in the rare book room, pulling out Edmund's old journals from his time in Greece. How had I never noticed before? The changed handwriting in certain entries, the odd gaps in his usually meticulous records, the sudden interest in cardiac health when he returned. Mrs. Chen arrived with dumplings and concern. "Bad energy again," she declared, setting up a makeshift breakfast. But different this time, older, like ghost waking up. At 9 sharp, we entered Harbor Trust Bank. The safety deposit box key felt heavy in my hand. The bank manager, who'd known us for decades, looked concerned at my obvious distress, but led us to the vault without question. Box 1964 was larger than expected. Inside, we found a carefully organized collection of evidence. Photographs of Edmund with a younger Beatrice in Greece. Medical records showing suspicious patterns of prescription changes. And most damning of all, Edmund's real journal from that period. "My dearest Goldie," the final entry read. "If you're reading this, something has happened to me. I've discovered something terrible about the Sterling family's business practices. They're not just art dealers, they're forgers, using small galleries, and bookshops for money laundering. I'm going to report them, but if anything happens to me, look in the false bottom of the Dickens first edition. I have hidden—" The entry ended there. My hands shook as Rose read through the medical records. "These prescriptions," she muttered. "They're all from doctors connected to Sterling and Associates. And look at the progression. Gradually increasing. Doses of medications that, when combined, could trigger cardiac events." Thad, who'd been examining the photographs, suddenly straightened. "Goldie, what was the name of that rare books dealer Edmund used in Athens? Alexandros something. Alexandros Papas. Why? Because he was found dead from an apparent heart attack 3 months after Edmund, and his shop was known for authenticating rare manuscripts. The pieces were falling into devastatingly clear place. Edmund had discovered the Sterling's forgery ring. Beatrice, then in her early 20s, had been sent to distract him while they covered their tracks, when he couldn't be dissuaded from reporting them. The brass bell chimed back at the shop, where we'd left Wren manning the counter. My phone buzzed with her text. "Someone here you need to see." We rushed back to find an elderly man waiting in Edmund's chair. He introduced himself as Dimitri's papas, Alexandros' brother. "I saw the news about Beatrice Sterling's arrest," he said in heavily accented English. "After all these years, perhaps it is time for truth." Over the next hour, Dimitri's revealed how the Sterling family had built their fortune. They would acquire struggling bookshops and galleries, use them to authenticate forged rare books and artworks, then discard the owners when they were no longer useful. Edmund had stumbled onto their operation while researching a suspicious Dickens first edition. "Your husband was good man," Dimitri said softly. "He tried to warn my brother. But Beatrice, she was already expert in manipulation even then. Very pretty, very clever with the drugs." My mind raced to the Dickens first edition Edmund had mentioned in his journal. We found it in the rare book room, its familiar weight now holding new significance. The false bottom revealed a hidden compartment containing a USB drive and a handwritten list of suspicious transactions. Rose immediately called her investigative team. Thad began cross-referencing the transactions with his library's historical records, but I found myself standing in the children's section, where a young Callum had spent so many happy hours while his father worked nearby. Had Edmund known he was in danger? Had he suspected that same danger might someday threaten his son? Was the shop's focus on community service and education his way of trying to protect us from the Sterling's influence? The brass bell chimed again. This time it was Callum, looking concerned. "Mom, Wren called me. What's going on?" "How do you tell your son that the woman who nearly destroyed his life had first destroyed his father's? That the addiction she'd exploited in him might have been rooted in unresolved grief?" But as I looked at Callum, clear-eyed now, 9 months sober, I saw his father's strength. "Sit down, sweetheart. There's something you need to know about Dad." Over the next few hours, more pieces of the puzzle emerged. Rose's investigators discovered similar patterns at other bookshops across Europe and America. Thad's research revealed a network of rare book dealers who died under suspicious circumstances. Mrs. Chen's nephew, our lawyer, began preparing documents for federal prosecutors. Victoria Sterling's letter had blown the lid off a decades-long criminal enterprise, but it had also given us something unexpected: clarity. Edmund's death wasn't random. His passion for books, for community, for helping others, hadn't been just about business. He'd been trying to create something strong enough to withstand the corruption he'd discovered. "The foundation," Callum said suddenly, looking around the shop with new understanding. "This is what Dad was building toward, isn't it? A place too deeply rooted in community to be used for fraud." Wren, who'd been quietly sketching throughout the revelations, showed us her latest work. It was a portrait of Edmund, pieced together from photographs and memories, surrounded by the community he'd helped build. "Legacy isn't just what we inherit," she said. "It's what we choose to do with it." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of federal investigations, international inquiries, and media attention. The local paper, which had once questioned my mental state, now ran a series on the Sterling family's crimes. Beatrice, already in custody for drugging Callum, faced additional charges related to Edmund's death. But something remarkable happened amid the chaos. The shop's story, now making national headlines, brought forward others who'd been victimized by the Sterlings. More bookshops, more families, more lives disrupted by their elaborate schemes. Rose helped coordinate legal responses across multiple jurisdictions. Thad's research skills proved invaluable to federal prosecutors. Even Mrs. Chen's extensive family network provided connections to similar cases in Asian markets. The Foundation's mission expanded to include support for businesses affected by fraud and families dealing with addiction. Callum, drawing on both his financial expertise and recovery experience, developed programs to help others recognize and resist manipulation. But it was in the quiet moments that the true impact hit hardest. One evening, after closing, I found myself in the rare book room, holding the Dickens first edition that had started everything. You knew, didn't you? I whispered to Edmund's memory. You knew the shop had to be more than just a business to survive them. The brass bell chimed softly. Thad, with his evening coffee and gentle presence. You know what I keep thinking? He said, settling into his usual chair. Edmund didn't just leave you a bookshop. He left you a fortress. Every story hour, every community program, every person who found sanctuary here. They're all stones in the wall he helped you build. Callum found us there carrying a box of his father's old journals. I've been reading these, he said. Really reading them, not just skimming. Dad wrote about his fears, his hopes for the shop, for me. He paused, emotion thick in his voice. He wrote about you, Mom, how your strength would keep his dream alive. Wren arrived next, adding her latest sketches to the growing collection documenting our story. I've been thinking about how to tell this part, she said. Not just the crime and punishment, but the healing. How do you show redemption in pictures? The same way you show it in life, I replied, looking around at my family, my community, my life's work, one page at a time. The revelation about Edmund's death could have broken us. Instead, it became the key to understanding our purpose. The shop wasn't just a business or a foundation. It was a testament to the power of stories to protect, heal, and transform. Victoria Sterling's letter had meant to shake our foundations. Instead, it had revealed how strong those foundations truly were. The brass bell hung silent in the gathering dusk. Its song ended for the day. But tomorrow would bring new chapters, new challenges, new opportunities to prove that light always overcomes darkness, one story at a time. And we would be ready. Because that's what Edmund had built here. Not just a bookshop, but a beacon. Not just a business, but a legacy of resilience. Not just a foundation, but a fortress of hope. The truth about his death had changed everything and nothing. We were still here, still standing, still telling stories that needed to be told. The brass bell would chime again tomorrow, and we would continue the work he'd started. Because sometimes the best revenge against darkness is simply to keep shining light. One page, one person, one story at a time. The federal prosecutors arrived on a Tuesday morning, their black SUVs looking out of place against Moonlight and Margins, Victorian charm. The brass bell chimed continuously as agents filed in, carrying boxes and equipment. Our cozy bookshop was about to become the center of an international investigation into one of the largest rare book fraud schemes in history. Mrs. Whitaker. The lead investigator, Agent Diana Martinez, said kindly, "We'll try to minimize disruption to your business, but we'll need access to everything, especially the rare book room." I watched as they set up their equipment, transforming our reading nook into a command center. Rose arrived shortly after, carrying files from her own investigation. Thad followed with his research materials, and Mrs. Chen's nephew brought legal documents in multiple languages. But it was the arrival of Interpol's rare book expert that truly signaled the magnitude of what we had uncovered. Dr. Helena Blackwood swept in, her silver hair immaculate, her eyes sharp behind vintage frames. "Show me the Dickens first edition," she demanded without preamble. The one Edmund Whittaker died protecting. As I led her to the rare book room, I noticed Callum arriving with an unexpected guest, Victoria Sterling herself, now under protective custody. She looked smaller than I'd imagined, her elegant clothes hanging loose on her frame, her hands trembling slightly. "Mrs. Whittaker?" she said softly. "There's more. So much more than what I wrote in that letter. Over the next few hours, Victoria revealed the full scope of the Sterling operation. It wasn't just rare books. It was a complex web of art fraud, money laundering, and strategic elimination of witnesses. Edmund had discovered only a small part of it, but it had been enough to sign his death warrant. "Beatrice was the perfect weapon," Victoria explained, her voice hollow. "Beautiful, charming, and completely without conscience. She learned early how to use people's weaknesses against them. Edmund's was his integrity. He couldn't be bought or threatened, so she had to find another way." Dr. Blackwood examined the Dickens with gloved hands, her expression growing increasingly troubled. "This isn't just a first edition," she announced. "It's a proof copy with corrections in Dickens' own hand. The value is astronomical. No wonder they killed to keep this quiet." Agent Martinez's team began mapping connections on clear boards, bookshops across Europe and America, suspicious deaths spanning decades, financial transactions hidden in legitimate businesses. "The foundation," Callum said suddenly, studying the patterns. "That's why Beatrice targeted me, isn't it? The shop was never the real goal. She needed to stop Mom from creating something that could expose their network," Victoria nodded wearily. "The Sterling family has been using small bookshops and galleries for generations. Your mother's foundation, with its focus on transparency and community involvement, would have made that impossible in this region." Rose was already on her phone, coordinating with prosecutors in multiple jurisdictions. Thad worked with Interpol analysts, his librarian's mind perfect for connecting seemingly unrelated details. Even Mrs. Chen's extensive family network proved valuable, providing information about similar operations in Asian markets. But it was Ren who made the crucial connection. Looking up from her sketchbook, where she'd been documenting the investigation, she asked, "What about the other children?" "What other children?" Agent Martinez asked. "In Dad's recovery group. He said there were others like him, children of bookshop owners and art dealers who died mysteriously. They all struggled with addiction later. What if that wasn't coincidence?" The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Beatrice hadn't just targeted potential witnesses. She'd systematically destroyed their families, creating cycles of trauma and addiction that made her later victims more vulnerable. Dr. Blackwood's team began cross-referencing deaths in the rare book trade with addiction treatment records. The pattern was undeniable. Wherever the Sterling operation had taken root, a generation of children had been left battling demons they didn't understand. "We need to go public," Rose declared. "Not just with the fraud, but with the human cost. These families deserve to know the truth." But Victoria's face had gone pale. "If you do that, they'll come for all of you. The Sterling family has connections everywhere. Judges, politicians, law enforcement. Why do you think I waited so long to come forward?" The brass bell chimed again. This time it was Mrs. Chen, carrying not just her usual dumplings but a stack of old photographs. "My cousin worked security at Harbor Bank 20 years. He remembered day Mr. Edmund die. See something strange but never know meaning until now." The photographs showed Beatrice leaving the bank the morning of Edmund's death, carrying a package that matched the description of a rare manuscript he'd been authenticating. Hours later, he was dead. Agent Martinez immediately dispatched a team to retrieve the bank's security footage archives. Dr. Blackwood began examining other manuscripts from that period. The web grew larger, more complex, more devastating with each new discovery. "They'll try to stop this from coming out," Victoria warned. "They always do." As if confirming her words, my phone buzzed with an alert from our security system. Someone had tried to access the shop's back entrance. Then another alert. The rare bookroom's window. "They're here," Victoria whispered. Agent Martinez's team moved with practiced efficiency, securing exits and protecting evidence. But I knew the shop better than anyone, knew its hidden corners, its secret spaces, its century-old quirks. "The tunnel," I said suddenly, remembering something Edmund had shown me years ago. During Prohibition, they used to move books through an underground passage to the harbor. That's how they'll come in. Callum, 9 months sober and stronger than ever, stepped forward. "Mom, where's the access point?" "Behind the maritime history shelves. Your father sealed it up, But the Sterlings would know about it," Victoria finished. "It's exactly how they operate." The next few minutes were a blur of activity. Federal agents took positions while Thad helped evacuate customers through the front door. Mrs. Chen's family members, seemingly multiplying by the minute, formed a protective circle around the shop. Rose was already calling in judicial favors, securing emergency warrants. Dr. Blackwood's team rushed to document and secure the evidence we'd gathered. But I couldn't stop thinking about Edmund, about how he died trying to protect not just books, but truth itself. "Mom," Callum said softly, "we need to move you to a secure location." But I stood my ground, remembering Edmund's words from his final journal entry. "A bookshop isn't just a business, Goldie girl. It's a fortress of ideas, and ideas, properly defended, can change the world." "I'm not leaving," I declared. "This is where we make our stand." Wren, who'd refused to evacuate, set up her sketchbook where she could document whatever came next. "Someone needs to tell this story," she said with her grandfather's determination. The brass bell chimed one final time as Agent Martinez ordered the shop locked down. Through the windows, we could see more federal vehicles arriving, their lights silent but their presence unmistakable. "They're in the tunnel," one of the agents reported through his radio. "Multiple subjects, armed." Victoria's hand shook as she gripped her chair. "My own family," she whispered, "coming to silence me like they silenced Edmund." But something had changed in the 20 years since Edmund's death. The shop wasn't just a shop anymore. It was a community center, a foundation headquarters, a symbol of resilience against corruption. And we weren't alone. Through the windows, we could see the literary ladies setting up a perimeter of lawn chairs, their book club apparently relocated to the sidewalk. Professor Jenkins and his colleagues stood nearby, live-streaming everything. Mrs. Chen's extended family had somehow multiplied again, filling the street with witnesses. The shop's security system pinged again, movement in the tunnel. But we were ready. Agent Martinez's team had positioned themselves strategically, using the shop's layout to their advantage. Dr. Blackwood's evidence was secured and backed up to multiple locations. Rose had judges standing by for emergency orders. Most importantly, we had the truth. About Edmund, about Beatrice, about decades of corruption hidden behind respectability. And as any good bookseller knows, truth has a power all its own. The maritime history shelves creaked slightly, and everyone tensed. Whatever came through that tunnel would find not a vulnerable bookshop, but a fortress. Not a grieving widow, but a woman who'd spent 20 years building something stronger than corruption. The brass bell hung silent above the door, waiting to chime for the next chapter of our story. And I stood in Edmund's old chair, surrounded by federal agents and family, friends, and books, ready to defend not just a business or a building, but an idea. That stories matter, that truth prevails, that light always overcomes darkness. The shelves creaked again. The final confrontation was about to begin. "For Edmund," I whispered, touching the worn leather of his chair. "For Dad," Callum added, standing tall beside me. "For all of us," Wren said, her pencil poised to record whatever came next. The maritime history shelves began to move. The maritime history shelves groaned open like a door to the past, revealing shadows that moved with deadly purpose. The first figure emerged, a man in an expensive suit, his sterling family resemblance unmistakable. Behind him came others, all armed, all moving with the confidence of people accustomed to taking what they wanted. "Victoria," the man said smoothly, ignoring the federal agent's weapons trained on him. "You've been a very disappointing mother." "Hello, Richard," Victoria replied, her voice steadier than her hands. "You're just in time to watch your empire fall." Richard Sterling's laugh held no humor. "Empire? You think this is about money? This is about legacy, about power, something you and your bleeding heart never understood." His eyes found mine. "Just like Edmund never understood. He understood perfectly," I said, standing firm behind Edmund's chair. "He understood that you built your legacy on destroying others." "Destroying?" Richard raised an eyebrow. "We elevated those little shops, gave them purpose. If some owners had unfortunate accidents after outliving their usefulness, well," he shrugged elegantly. "Progress has its price." Agent Martinez stepped forward, her weapon steady. "Richard Sterling, you and your associates are under arrest for multiple federal crimes, including conspiracy to commit murder." "Are we?" Richard's smile reminded me of Beatrice's, beautiful and deadly. "I think not. You see, in about 30 seconds, every piece of evidence you've gathered will be destroyed, along with this charming little shop and everyone in it." A red light blinked on one of his associates' devices, and my blood ran cold. They'd rigged explosives in the tunnel. But Richard hadn't counted on one thing. We weren't the only ones who'd been busy during those tense hours of preparation. "Now, Mrs. Chen," I called out. The sprinkler system activated instantly, but instead of water, a fine powder rained down, fire suppression chemicals that Mrs. Chen's firefighter cousin had installed hours earlier. Electronic devices sparked and died, including the detonator in the tunnel. "Impossible!" Richard sputtered, his perfect suit now coated in white powder. "No!" Callum stepped forward, looking so much like his father in that moment. "Just well planned. You taught Beatrice everything she knows about manipulation, but you never understood what this place really is. The federal agents moved in, securing Richard and his associates, but he wasn't finished. You think this ends here?" He laughed. "We have judges, politicians, police." "Had," Rose interrupted, entering with a tablet displaying multiple news feeds. "While you were busy planning this dramatic entrance, your friends have been falling like dominoes. Amazing what people will confess when faced with federal conspiracy charges." Dr. Blackwood emerged from the rare book room, carrying the Dickens first edition. "Your entire authentication network has been exposed. Interpol is raiding locations across 3 continents as we speak." Richard's composure finally cracked. "Victoria," he snarled at his wife, "you destroyed your own family?" "No, Richard. I saved it, starting with our grandson." Victoria moved to stand beside Callum. "I couldn't save Edmund." but I could help save his son. The brass bell chimed unexpectedly, more federal agents arriving with news. Beatrice had agreed to turn state's evidence from prison, providing details about every operation, every death, every manipulation over the past 20 years. "It's over, Dad," Victoria said softly. "The sterling legacy ends here." As they led Richard away, I noticed Wren had never stopped sketching. Her pages captured everything: the tunnel confrontation, the failed explosion, the arrests. But she'd also captured something else: the way the community had rallied around the shop, the strength of family bonds restored, the triumph of truth over corruption. "Gran," she said, showing me the final sketch. "Look what you built." The image showed Moonlight and Margins not as it was, but as it would be. A foundation helping families heal from addiction, a center for literacy and learning, a safe haven for those seeking their own stories of redemption. The cleanup took hours. Federal agents documented everything. Dr. Blackwood's team secured the rare books, and Rose coordinated with prosecutors. But through it all, the shop remained standing, its Victorian bones stronger than ever. Mrs. Chen appeared with enough food to feed an army, which was fortunate given how many people had gathered to help. The literary ladies organized an impromptu cleanup brigade. Professor Jenkins and his colleagues began documenting testimonies from other affected families who'd started coming forward. As evening fell, I found myself in the rare book room with Callum and Wren, looking at Edmund's journals. He knew. Callum said softly. He knew they might kill him, but he kept fighting anyway. Because he understood what was at stake, I replied. Not just books or business, but the idea that stories have power. Power to heal, to reveal truth, to change lives. Thad joined us carrying his usual evening coffee. You know what I keep thinking. Edmund didn't just leave you a bookshop. He left you a mission. The brass bell chimed one final time that day. Agent Martinez returning with Victoria. We'll need you both to testify, she said. The Sterling case will be one of the largest fraud and conspiracy trials in history. We'll be ready, I assured her. All of us. Victoria looked around the shop with new eyes. I spent decades afraid of my own family, watching them destroy others. I never imagined their downfall would come from a bookshop. Not just a bookshop, Wren corrected, showing her latest sketch. A fortress. The image showed Moonlight and Margins surrounded by light, its windows glowing like beacons, its doors open to all seeking sanctuary. In the foreground, she'd drawn Edmund's chair, not empty now, but surrounded by family, friends, and books. This is what we're building, she explained. Not just a foundation or a business, but a legacy of light. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of federal investigations, international inquiries, and media attention. But through it all, the shop remained open, its brass bell chiming welcome to those seeking stories, sanctuary, or simply a place to belong. Callum threw himself into developing programs for families affected by addiction and fraud. Rose helped create legal frameworks to protect vulnerable businesses. That expanded our educational initiatives, while Mrs. Chen's family network provided support across communities. But it was Wren's art that truly captured our transformation. Her sketches, now being published as a graphic novel, told the story of a family's journey from tragedy to triumph, from loss to legacy. One quiet evening, after the last customer had left and the brass bell had sung its final song of the day, I sat in Edmund's chair surrounded by the books we'd loved together. We did it, I whispered to his memory. We turned your death into something meaningful. your sacrifice into something powerful. The shop creaked gently, its old bones settling into night, but it wasn't just a shop anymore. It was a testament to the power of stories, the strength of community, and the triumph of light over darkness. The brass bell hung silent above the door, waiting for tomorrow's chapter to begin. But now we knew, with certainty, that whatever came next, we would face it together, stronger for having faced down our demons, richer for having chosen truth over fear. Because that's what Edmund had really left us. Not just a bookshop, but a legacy of courage. Not just a business, but a beacon of hope. Not just a foundation, but a fortress, where stories would always have power, and truth would always find light. The maritime history shelves stood solid once more, their secret tunnel sealed not with concrete this time, but with truth. The rare books sat safe in their cases, not just as valuable objects, but as testaments to the power of words to change worlds. And in Edmund's old chair, surrounded by the family he'd died protecting and the community he'd helped build, I finally felt at peace. Because sometimes the greatest stories aren't found in books at all. They're written in the choices we make, the stands we take, and the light we choose to shine in darkness. The brass bell would chime again tomorrow, and we would be ready to help write new stories of healing, of hope, of redemption. 1 year later, I stood in Moonlight Margins' doorway, watching the morning light paint shadows across newly refinished floors. The brass bell chimed softly in the breeze, its familiar song now carrying notes of triumph rather than tragedy. The Sterling trial had concluded last week, making headlines across the globe. Richard Sterling and his associates received multiple life sentences for crimes spanning decades. Beatrice's testimony had helped dismantle international fraud networks, leading to the recovery of millions in stolen art and rare books. Victoria, granted immunity for her cooperation, now worked with federal agencies to prevent similar schemes. But the real victory wasn't in the courtrooms. It was here, in the transformed space of our beloved bookshop, the Moonlight Margins. Foundation had exceeded all expectations. What started as a dream of literacy programs and addiction support had blossomed into something extraordinary. The shop's original Victorian bones remained, but inside, everything had evolved. The rare book room, where Edmund had first discovered the Sterling conspiracy, now housed both precious volumes and healing programs. Dr. Blackwood had helped us create a unique curriculum combining bibliotherapy with addiction recovery. The very books that had once been tools for fraud now helped people rebuild their lives. Callum, 15 months sober, led many of these sessions. "Stories saved me twice," he often told participants, first through their magic, then through their truth. His recovery groups met in the window seat where he'd once read as a child, turning full circle in the most beautiful way. The brass bell chimed, announcing Rose's arrival for our weekly foundation meeting. She carried not just her usual legal briefcase, but a bound volume, the first copy of Wren's graphic novel. "It's beautiful," I said, running my fingers over the cover. The image showed the shop as both fortress and sanctuary, its windows glowing with welcome, its doors open to all. The title, Legacy of Light, captured everything we'd become. Wren's artistic career had launched spectacularly with this project. Her telling of our story, blending family drama with international intrigue, had resonated deeply. But more importantly, it had helped other families affected by the Sterlings come forward, finding healing in shared truth. The morning's peace was interrupted by excited voices, the literary ladies arriving early for their new program. What had once been a simple book club had evolved into a support network for families dealing with addiction and fraud. They filled the shop with chatter and purpose. Setting up chairs for today's session, Mrs. Chen appeared with her usual impeccable timing, carrying breakfast for everyone. Her family's involvement had grown beyond food. They had become integral to our international outreach, helping other communities establish similar programs. "Special day today," she reminded me, setting out dumplings. "First graduation." Yes, today marked the completion of our first full-cycle recovery program. 20 participants, each connected to victims of the Sterling conspiracy, had worked through their trauma using literature, therapy, and community support. The ceremony would be held in the children's section, where so many healing stories had begun. Thad arrived next, carrying not just his usual coffee, but a stack of research, papers. His work documenting the intersection of rare book fraud and family trauma had earned international recognition. More importantly, it had helped create protocols to prevent similar schemes from destroying other families. "You should see the library's waiting list for Wren's book," he said, settling into his usual chair. "People are finally ready to talk about what happened to them." The brass bell chimed again. Callum and Victoria, deep in conversation about their latest project. They'd created a workshop series helping businesses recognize and prevent fraud, turning their shared pain into practical protection. "Mom," Callum called out, his eyes bright with purpose. "Wait until you hear what Victoria's discovered about other families like ours. We're not just helping people recover, we're preventing history from repeating." Victoria, no longer the frightened woman who'd sent that life-changing letter, had found her own redemption in helping others. "Edmund would be proud," she said softly. "This is exactly what he was trying to protect." The morning flew by in a blur of activity. Graduates and their families began arriving, filling the shop with nervous excitement. Professor Jenkins and his colleagues set up recording equipment to document testimonies for their ongoing research. Even Agent Martinez stopped by, bringing congratulations from the federal task force. As I watched the shop transform from business to classroom to healing, space and back again, I thought about Edmund's final journal entry, his hope that the truth would eventually come to light. He couldn't have imagined how that light would grow, spreading from our little Victorian bookshop to touch lives across continents. The graduation ceremony itself was beautiful in its simplicity. Each participant shared their story, standing in the same spot where they'd first admitted needing help. They spoke of addiction, of inherited trauma, of the weight of secrets finally lifted. But mostly they spoke of hope. One participant, the daughter of a gallery owner who died mysteriously 20 years ago, summed it up perfectly. "I always thought my father's death broke our family's story, but here, surrounded by books and understanding, I've learned that broken stories can have new endings." Wren captured everything in her sketchbook, her artist's eye finding beauty in healing. Her latest series, focusing on the graduates' journeys, would become part of the Foundation's materials, showing others that transformation was possible. As evening approached and the last guests departed, I found myself in the rare book room with Callum and Victoria. The Dickens first edition that had started everything sat safely in its case, no longer just a valuable object, but a symbol of truth's power. "You know what I've been thinking?" Callum said, looking around at the shop that had shaped his life. "Dad didn't just save books that day. He saved all of us, even though it took 20 years to understand how." Victoria nodded, tears in her eyes. By refusing to be part of the corruption, he created a crack in the Sterling facade. That crack let the light in eventually. The brass bell chimed one final time. Thad, bringing his evening coffee and quiet companionship. We sat together in the gathering dusk, surrounded by books and memories and possibilities. "I've been researching something interesting," Thad said, his librarian's curiosity bright. Throughout history, bookshops have often been more than just businesses. They've been sanctuaries, meeting places, centers of resistance against corruption. What you've built here, it's part of that legacy. Looking around at what we'd created, the Foundation's resources, the recovery programs, the international connections, the lives transformed, I felt Edmund's presence strongly, not as a ghost of grief, but as a foundation of strength. The shop had evolved far beyond his original vision, becoming something he couldn't have imagined, but would have deeply understood. Every chime of the brass bell now announced not just a customer, but a potential story of healing. Wren joined us, adding final touches to her sketches of the graduation. "You know what I love about art?" she said, showing us her work. "It helps us see the whole story, not just the darkness we've faced, but the light we've created." Her drawings captured everything: the graduates' proud faces, the supportive community, the shop's transformation from victim of fraud to beacon of hope. But mostly they captured the spirit of what we'd built, a place where truth and healing walked hand in hand. The next morning I arrived early as usual, unlocking the door just as dawn painted the windows gold. The brass bell chimed its welcome, and I smiled at the sound that had become not just familiar but precious. The day would bring new challenges, new stories, new opportunities to help others find their way through darkness. The Foundation's work was expanding, reaching communities we'd never dreamed of touching. Callum's recovery programs had waiting lists. Wren's art therapy sessions were changing lives. But more than programs or services, we offered something Edmund had understood: the value of truth. Truth about addiction, about family trauma, about the possibility of redemption. Truth that had cost him his life but had ultimately saved so many others. As I settled into his old leather chair, I felt not grief but gratitude. Gratitude for the legacy he'd left us, for the strength we'd found in facing our demons, for the community that had become family. The brass bell chimed again, the first visitor of the day arriving, and I was ready, as I'd always be, to help write another chapter in our ongoing story of transformation. Because that's what Moonlight and Margins had become. Not just a bookshop or a foundation, or even a fortress. It had become a place where light always overcame darkness, where broken stories found new endings, where truth and healing walked hand in hand. The morning sun streamed through the Victorian windows, catching dust motes that danced like stars. Another day was beginning. Another chance to prove that Edmund's sacrifice mattered. Another opportunity to show that even the darkest stories could find light. And the brass bell chimed on, singing its song of welcome, of hope, of endless possibilities. One page, one person, one truth at a time, forever. 5 years later, the morning sun streamed through Moonlight and Margins' stained glass windows. Our newest addition, each panel depicting scenes from the shop's history. The brass bell chimed its familiar welcome as I unlocked the doors for another day, its song now echoing through expanded spaces that Edmund could never have imagined. What had started as a single Victorian bookshop had grown into something extraordinary. We'd gradually acquired neighboring buildings, connecting them with glass-enclosed walkways that preserved their historic character while creating something new. The original shop remained our heart, but now it beat for a much larger purpose. The rare book room, where everything had begun, still housed our precious volumes, But it also served as a reminder of truth's power. Edmund's original Dickens first edition held pride of place, its story now known worldwide, thanks to Wren's graphic novel series. Legacy of Light had become more than just a book. It was now a movement, with foundations similar to ours springing up in cities across the globe, each one focused on combining literacy with healing, using stories to help people overcome trauma and addiction. The brass bell chimed again, Callum arriving early for his morning session. 5 years sober now, he'd become one of the country's leading experts on fraud-related family trauma. His recovery programs had helped hundreds of families heal from experiences similar to ours. "Morning, Mom," he called out, carrying not just his materials but a copy of Time magazine. "Have you seen this?" The cover story featured Moonlight and Margins as a model for community transformation. "From Fraud to Foundation, How One Bookshop Changed the World," read the headline, accompanied by one of Wren's illustrations. "Your father would never believe this," I said, touching the image of our expanded campus. "Actually, I think he would," Callum replied, setting up for his session. He saw the potential for good here long before any of us. The morning brought our usual wonderful chaos. The Literary Ladies, now an international organization with chapters in 12 countries, arrived for their weekly planning session. Mrs. Chen and her family, who'd expanded their restaurant into a culinary therapy program, brought breakfast for everyone. Rose swept in, still carrying her judicial briefcase despite having been appointed to the federal bench 2 years ago. "The international accord is finally ready," she announced. 17 countries agreeing to standardize rare book authentication and fraud prevention. The legislation, inspired by our story, would help prevent other families from experiencing what we had. Victoria had been instrumental in crafting it, using her insider knowledge of the Sterling operation to close loopholes and protect vulnerable businesses. Thad arrived next, no longer just bringing coffee but leading a team of researchers, documenting the intersection of literacy, trauma recovery, and community healing. The library science program he'd developed, based on our experience, was being adopted by universities worldwide. "You should see the latest data," he said, settling into his usual chair, now one of many in our expanded reading room. "The combination of bibliotherapy and addiction recovery is showing unprecedented success rates." The brass bell's chime announced Wren's arrival. At 21, she'd become an artistic force, her graphic novels about healing and transformation touching millions. But she still spent every morning in her window seat, sketching the life of the shop. "Gran, wait until you see these," she called out, pulling out her latest drawings. She'd been documenting our newest initiative, a program helping children affected by family fraud understand and process their experiences through art and storytelling. Victoria joined us, her silver hair elegant as ever, but her eyes now bright with purpose rather than fear. She'd transformed from reluctant whistleblower to powerful advocate, using her experience to help other families break free from cycles of corruption and manipulation. "The Stockholm Conference wants us to present next month," she said, sharing her tablet screen. "They're calling our model the Moonlight Method, combining business ethics, addiction recovery, and community healing." The brass bell chimed continuously now as people arrived for various programs. The children's section, where Callum had once played, now hosted healing story hours for young people affected by family trauma. The poetry corner, Professor Jenkins' old haunt, offered writing therapy sessions. Our International Connections room, housed in what had once been the vacant building next door, hummed with activity. Video screens showed similar programs in progress across the globe, each one adapted to its local community, but sharing our core mission of transformation through truth. Mrs. Chen's nephew, now heading our legal advocacy department, arrived with news from Washington. "The Bookshop Protection Act passed," he announced proudly. "Small businesses will have new federal protections against fraud schemes. The legislation born from our experience would help prevent other shops from being targeted by criminals like the Sterlings. But more importantly, it recognized the vital role community businesses played in social healing. As morning turned to afternoon, I found myself in the original rare book room, surrounded by the volumes Edmund had loved. The space still held its antique charm, but now it also housed hope. Each book a testament to survival, each page a possibility for healing. The brass bell chimed again. Agent Martinez, now director of the FBI's new Cultural Heritage Protection Division, paying one of her regular visits. "The Sterling case changed everything," she said, settling into a chair. "Not just how we handle fraud, but how we understand its impact on families and communities. What you've built here, it's become a blueprint." She wasn't exaggerating. The Moonlight Margins model had been studied by law enforcement agencies, social services departments, and community organizations worldwide. Our combination of business, preservation, addiction recovery, and family healing had proven remarkably effective. The afternoon brought one of my favorite weekly events, our intergenerational story circle. Survivors of fraud and addiction sat with their families, sharing experiences and finding healing in each other's narratives. Wren captured these sessions in her sketches, each drawing a testament to the power of truth told in safety. "You know what I love about these gatherings?" Callum said, watching people arrive. "Everyone comes in thinking they're broken, but they leave knowing they're part of a bigger story. That bigger story was evident everywhere I looked. The walls of our expanded space displayed artwork from recovery program graduates. The community bulletin boards overflowed with success stories and support group announcements. Even the cafe, once just a coffee corner, had become a training program for people rebuilding their lives. The brass bells song was almost constant now, each chime announcing another person seeking healing, another story beginning, another life turning toward light. But its original tone remained, reminding us of our roots, of Edmund's sacrifice, of truth's eternal power. As evening approached, our regular closing circle gathered in the original shop space. Rose, Thad, Callum, Wren, Victoria, Mrs. Chen, and others who'd been part of our journey from the beginning. We sat surrounded by books and memories, sharing updates and planning future initiatives. "Sometimes I wonder," Victoria mused, "what Richard and Beatrice would think of all this. Their scheme to destroy the shop ended up creating something so much more powerful." "That's the thing about truth," Rose replied. "It has a way of growing beyond anyone's attempts to contain it." Wren showed us her latest project, a series of murals for children's hospitals, helping young patients process trauma through story and art. The images combined elements from our journey with universal themes of healing and hope. "I never thought my sketches of Gran's bookshop would lead to this," she said, displaying designs that would soon bring comfort to children around the world. Callum shared news from his international recovery network. Former victims of fraud schemes had become counselors, helping others navigate similar traumas. The cycle of destruction had been transformed into a circle of healing. "Dad's legacy keeps growing," he said softly. "Every person who finds healing here extends it further." Mrs. Chen, ever practical, announced plans for expanding her culinary therapy program. "Food heals body," she declared. Stories heal heart. Together make whole person strong. As darkness fell, and the last visitors departed, I found myself again in Edmund's old chair, surrounded by the family we'd built and the mission we'd grown. The brass bell hung silent now, resting until tomorrow's songs. "You know what I've realized?" Thad said, bringing his evening coffee as he had for so many years. "This place isn't just a foundation or a healing center. It's a testament to the idea that light always finds a way." Looking around at what we'd created, the expanded programs, the international connections, the lives transformed, I felt Edmund's presence strongly, not as a ghost of what was lost, but as a foundation for what had been found. The shop had become more than any of us could have imagined, yet it remained true to its original purpose, creating space for stories to change lives. Every chime of the brass bell still announced that possibility, now amplified across continents and generations. Wren added final touches to her day's sketches, capturing not just what we'd built, but what we'd become. A beacon of hope, a fortress of truth, a sanctuary for healing. Her art, like our mission, had grown beyond boundaries while keeping its heart intact. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new stories, new opportunities to extend our light further. The foundation's work would continue evolving, reaching more communities, touching more lives, but our core purpose would remain unchanged, helping people write new endings to broken stories. The brass bell would chime again in the morning, singing its song of welcome and possibility, and we would be ready, as we'd always been, to help. Write the next chapter in humanity's ongoing story of transformation. Because that's what Moonlight and Margins had truly become. Not just a place or a program or even a movement. It had become a promise that light always overcomes darkness, that truth always finds its way, that healing is always possible. One page, one person, one story at a time, forever and beyond. The brass bell hung silent in the gathering dusk, its daily song complete but its promise eternal. Tomorrow would bring new chapters, new healing, new light, and we would be here, ready to help write them all. Because some stories never really end. They just keep growing, keep healing, keep shining light into darkness, like the one that started, with a bookshop, a brass bell, and a man who believed in the power of truth, like the one we're still writing, every single day. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.